Hello everyone, this is Michael Boucher for the Atkinson Gazette, and right now I am showing you some slides that were obtained from the fire department. These slides were obtained as a way of providing information about the current state of the fire department and to provide some information about Article 13. This is being used in place of the video content that we published earlier this week. So on this first slide, it is an overview of the full-time staff that are currently in the fire department. We have one full-time fire chief, one full-time administrative assistant, and you have 4 full-time firefighters slash emergency, EMTs. And right now we have 1 lieutenant, and there is 1 position that's currently vacant. And for a current list of all personnel, you can go to the town website under the fire department section. In the call department, there are 8 call members that are officers, and there's 24 members for fire and or EMS staff, and there's also a non-paid volunteer pastor. The call member scheduled hours are from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Every 10 days for firefighter slash EMT, and every 6 days for officers. All right, so this slide, there's showing a difference between call members versus full staff members. And I should probably clarify that call members are like on-call members. So we have the full-time staff, they have shifts of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Each shift has at least 2 personnel, or firefighter and EMS. And the personnel rotate on shift every 5 days. The call members, they're on call from 6 to 10 p.m. and they can be scheduled also from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. They're paid hourly for each call response and training, and these officers receive pay for administration, and call members do not receive benefits. On this slide, it's just a brief history of how the fire department was over the past few years. So from 1944 to 2001, it was 100% a volunteer department. In 2002, there was a transition from the volunteers to call members, which includes all officers. And then there's a big jump all the way up to 2022, where they now have 4 full-time fire and EMS staff. And we'll get into a reason why it changed to that. And then now this year in 2024, we have our first full-time fire chief. In this slide, the fire department is explaining why 24-hour staffing is needed. So there is a gap or a lack of coverage from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So basically there's no full-time staff available at this point. So now they're using call members. And these call members are, like I said, on call, and between 6 to 10 p.m. When they receive a call from dispatch, like from 911, they would go from their homes to then, they would get ready, they would go to the fire department, and then they will get their vehicle and they'll go out to the spot of wherever the emergency is. And this is an increasing problem based on the call volume, which you'll see in the next slide. As previously mentioned in the previous slide, the reason why Atkinson is moving to full-time personnel is because volunteer, even with pay, has been decreasing. And to further complicate the problem, as the call volume increases, the town population is growing, and at the same time, it's also getting older. New Hampshire is one of the oldest states in the country, and like I mentioned before, in the next slide we'll see a chart of call volume over time, and right now 1/3 of those calls are for adults who are 65 and older. So this is a problem that's really kind of compounding on itself, and the idea for staffing is definitely becoming more urgent. As mentioned in the previous slide, here is the call data from the last 5 years showing the amount of calls that the fire department has been fielding. And as you can see, there is a very gradual but clear increase of calls over time. And there's also another troubling trend where there's an increasing number of simultaneous calls. And this means that when there's two or more calls happening at once, and 75 to 80% of the call volume are EMS calls, so they're just emergency calls. That doesn't necessarily mean like a fire. It could be responding to an accident. Somebody's having some sort of medical complication or some sort of injury. So there is, with the trend being the way it is, you're going to see that there something needs to be done. Here is a 1-year snapshot of the trend of when majority of the calls take place. You can see that the peak call load is between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. and then it kind of falls off between 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. And if you recall earlier, there is that gap period between the gap period is between 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So during the peak call period, you're having some of that gap coverage issue. So you can sort of see what's happening here. This slide goes into more detail about simultaneous calls. I'm just going to read off from the slide here. Overlapping calls by hour. This slide demonstrates the occurrence of a second or third call occurring while we are responding to a call. For comparison, 5 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and 5 a.m. historically have only had one emergency occurring. In comparison, between noon and 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. are the highest probability of a second or third call happening simultaneously, which is a statement of benefit for having a vibrant call department that can step in and tackle multiple simultaneous calls. So, in other words, especially once again identifying that 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. time period, ideally you want to have more staff, within the department at the time instead of relying on the call service members, because the fact that the fire department's having 2 or 3 calls or more at once during these peak time periods. In this slide, it's just a brief snapshot and an estimation of how many calls will take place in 2024. So between January 1st of 2024 to February 18th of 2024, the fire department fielded 134 calls. So based on this trend so far in these first 2 months, the fire department's estimating about 1,018 calls. And if you recall from 2023, there were 784 calls, which was already increased from the year before that, and the year before that, and so on. So even if this 1,018 calls is way too high of an estimation, you can still easily assume that the number of calls total for the year of 2024 will be higher than 784. So this slide is in regards to the town's contract with Pride Star Treaty EMS. They provide advanced life support ambulance services. The contract, which is only for 1 year, is at a cost of $130. And you can see here in the slide that the 2 advanced life support ambulances, that includes having 1 paramedic and 1 EMT, advanced EMT. One of the ambulances are stationed within the Atkinson Fire Station. The other one's stationed in the Hampstead Fire Station. And sometimes they have an occasional backup from Massachusetts, in particular Haverhill, where there's a Trinity location. These ambulances cover 24/7 emergencies within the 5 towns, which I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe it was Hampstead, Atkinson, Newton, Sandown, and I believe Kingston. I could be wrong. I don't have that information in front of me. That's something the fire chief would know for sure. And I'm just going to read this little blurb at the bottom. We have a 1-year contract with Pride Star Trinity EMS. The contract also provides EMS services to 4 other towns, effective March 1st. Trinity is contracted to provide 2 advanced life support ambulances to 5 towns. Under contract, these ambulances are staffed with at least 1 paramedic and 1 EMT or advanced EMT if available. Trinity does not provide a backup ambulance from Haverhill, Massachusetts when the 2 contracted New Hampshire ambulances are not available. So if you really think about that statement there, they're suggesting that we have those 2 ambulances that are more local, one in Atkinson and one in Hampstead, so that should cover all those simultaneous calls. But because the trend of simultaneous calls are increasing, there is sometimes an occurrence in which a third ambulance might be pulled from Haverhill to help out with the situation, assuming that ambulance is available. So in this slide, it's sort of highlighting some of the issues with the use of using PriceStar Trainee EMS. And it's not really a fault of the service provider, but rather just a logistical issue. So right now, their current staffing, sometimes there's a paramedic that is occasionally not available to staff an ambulance. And this is sort of a common sense point, but the backup ambulance response from Haverhill can take 10 plus minutes to respond because they're literally coming from a completely different city in a completely different state. And they also may have an issue with a paramedic not being able to be staffed on that ambulance. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, they also can have an issue with simultaneous calls, and that ambulance may not be available to handle our simultaneous calls over here in New Hampshire. And just 2 brief informational points. It says Atkinson Fire Department transports about 12 Atkinson's patients per year, and the Atkinson Fire Department provides fire and EMS mutual aid. That's important to keep in mind because when other towns in the area, let's say like Newton or even Hampstead or whatever other town that's in the area is having the same situation with simultaneous calls, Atkinson Fire Department will show up with their, emergency vehicles and personnel to help out. It's just how the fire departments in the area have worked things out. This slide further explains mutual aid, so I'll just read it off here. Atkinson Fire Department provides mutual aid to area towns in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Fire departments have mutual aid agreements that allow them to help each other for incidents such as fire, critical EMS calls, and more. If PriceStar Trinity is not available, Atkinson Fire Department will respond to mutual aid departments to provide services, leaving no full-time staff at our station to cover calls for Atkinson. We rely on Atkinson Fire Department call members to provide coverage for calls while the full-timers are out of town handling a mutual aid partner's call. Mutual aid use by area towns has become more common, especially with Plastow Fire Department, as they have had a rapid increase in calls over the past 2 years due to the opening of 2 urgent care facilities and a standalone ER in Plastow. Our mutual aid agreement also allows other area departments to help Atkinson Fire Department when we need assistance. So in this slide, it's just highlighting a few points about the current and future state with staffing and response issues. So keep in mind that the contract with PriceStar Trinity ends March 1st of 2025, at which point Atkinson's going to have to start making some choices. Are they going to try to continue having a contract with Trinity, or are they going to go in a different direction? The options are kind of limited based on the fact that there's staffing issues kind of in the area, just finding qualified people to run emergency services, and of course there was an issue with volunteers. And at the same time, since Plastow now offers their own emergency services, there are now less towns involved who need services from Trinity. So there is a thought that Trinity may increase their prices to make up the fact that they're now serving a smaller population, and they have to make it, of course, worthwhile. But we won't know until it gets closer to March of next year. So, this is something that the fire department's going to have to consider, and obviously the town of Atkinson's going to have to consider. I mean, are we going to deal with a higher cost? Are we going to go try to solve our own problems? What will we do next? So, the proposed idea, which will be kind of initiated through Article 13, is that you can address some of these problems by hiring 2 full-time members who could start September 1st of this year. And then you could schedule some part-time members as well. The existing call members could help fill in the gaps in the shifts, assuming you're able to get full-time members. So now they would be able to have 24/7 coverage, because at this point, instead of having 6 personnel, you could have 8 personnel. The cost of doing so would cost the town $120,000 for the first year, and then next year it would cost $223,000. And based on these numbers, I do not believe they're finalized. These are actually estimates, but you can assume that they're within the ballpark of being accurate. All right, so now you've come to the end of the slide deck here. Hopefully you have enough information for you to understand the situation. If you have any questions about this information or you need more details, you should reach out to the fire chief. His name is Eric Thomas. His email is ethomas@atkinson-nh.gov, or you may call him on his work cell phone at 603-234-0725. Once again, this is Michael Boucher for the Atkinson Gazette, providing information about the current state of the fire department and some brief information about Article 13. Thank you for listening.